Welcome to Selling What's Possible, a podcast dedicated to enterprise account management. Today, we're going to focus on customer needs and how that fits into driving the growth cycle of account planning as we enter 2025. And today, joining me is Ted Corbeill. Ted is the Director of Revenue Enablement for L2L, which is a software company focused on manufacturing sector. Ted, thanks for joining us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background in revenue enablement? And, I read a little bit about you on LinkedIn when it comes to your passion for value creation opportunities. So share a little bit about your perspective on that as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Nice to meet you. Thanks for inviting me on the podcast. Yeah, I'm Ted Corbeill. I'm a retired Marine intelligence officer, and somehow, some way, I found my niche in enablement and sales enablement. And really, what I've really found the last couple of years is my military approach to building data-driven, disciplined, repeatable processes has found a niche within early-stage, high-growth SaaS companies that are looking for value creation and value growth. You got to have someone that can come in, organize a cohesive plan to drive the growth strategies to deliver those kind of results.
Well, you must be a very popular guy because that's exactly what performance is based on. And in the world of AI and so much data, it's still something that is elusive. Predictable growth, achieving predictable growth, sustainable growth, making it repetitive and easy. And that brings us to this whole, area of account planning specifically. We're moving into the whole cycle of account planning for 2025. And from my perspective, account planning, when I talk to most leaders, it's incredibly manual. It's still in PowerPoint. It's a cyclical thing. It's something that teams have to do versus want to do or desire to do. Typically, it's to frame something for executive management, goes and sits on the shelf, isn't really looked at again until the next planning cycle. And it's very difficult to execute whatever's in that plan. What's the purpose of the plan? What's the scope of the plan? So, tell us a little bit about your perspective on account planning, where the biggest gaps are, and where account planning should be headed.
Yeah, of course. It's everyone's favorite time of year, right? The holiday season. No, it's account planning season, right? So it's everyone's time of year. And as you pointed to, some of the problems I've seen been a part of probably 6 different sales organizations now, from enterprise all the way down to early stage startup. And they all kind of continue to have the same common faults of being superly internal, myopic, self-serving, where account planning is one of those dreaded things that everyone knows it's that time to do my account plan or update my account plan. And it almost always defaults to a check the box activity. There's a framework, a standard template, fill out these slides in this presentation. And what I'm seeing more and more is those account plans tend to be more focused on your products and the latest and greatest products and the sales targets for those new products or features or capabilities, and devoid of any insight into what the customer is trying to do. What are the customer's growth plans? What are their strategic initiatives? What are their desired outcomes? So it becomes just a recipe and just an exercise in futility, where even the most successful reps have this very complicated, complex plan that shows very clearly how they're going to sell XYZ products at X amount of dollars of revenue for pipeline for this year. But almost as quickly as they're approved, they're forgotten, right? You almost never see an instance where you get regular updates on how the execution is going and the results.
Right.
And you almost never do a debrief at the end. See, did we accomplish any of those? And quite often, I never really see, is it ever co-developed with the customer? Is it ever presented to them? Are there any inputs from the customer in those things? Those are all kind of the traditional account planning cycle is one of those bad habits, one of those things that have always been done that we've passed on from generation to generation of sales teams. And it's just not working for anyone.
Kind of ironic that the account plan is really not about the account in what they need, but more about sort of the internal perspective on what is to be sold to that account or what's desired in terms of revenue targets. And it's really, it seems to me, mostly a financial exercise a lot of the times, which is how much have we sold them? How much are we going to sell them? And then we're done. And
Yeah.
that's kind of such a narrow perspective. Where do you think that comes from? Who created the original account planning templates that are handed out for these guys to fill in the first?
You know what? I think it comes down to math. Here's the number. How do we get that number? Let's start breaking that number into pieces, right? If we have the large company sales target, let's allocate that across the sales teams. Now it's split out amongst the reps, and now the rep's going to break it out against their book of business, and they're going to say, I got to get $1 million against these 20 accounts. So where can I go get that money from? So what I do is I just take all my products and I put in a matrix and say, what are they currently buying and what haven't they bought yet? Voila. There's where the extra pipeline is going to come from, right? So it's an exercise just in mathematics that doesn't take into consideration any data points other than that, right? It seems easy to do. It seems logical to do. And when you show it, it seems like, oh, this is based on substance, when it's not. It's just based on raw math out with no context to the business intelligence, the market intelligence, or what your customers are actually trying to do.
Yeah, it's so interesting you bring up math. I have this something I call the economy of key accounts, and it's the fact that the bigger the companies, the Global 2000, the Global 3000, they spend by far and away the most money on almost every category. In fact, the growth potential inside these accounts is astronomically huge compared to what account teams are pursuing. And if you think about the math that's being followed as you articulated, it's kind of from the inside out. It's almost narrowing the opportunity for growth by its very design, because it's looking to just fill a number that is a very small percentage of the total growth potential. And you're right, when the focus is on that, you tend to just, well, I only need to sell these 3 products to make my number, versus I have the opportunity, given the problems this client has, to sell 100x the amount of value. Or if I follow a pathway into this large scale enterprise account, I could really exploit it for so much greater growth. But the design of the plan almost puts this wall around the growth potential and contains it in a very small, area. How do you think account teams can sort of overcome that to expand the total perspective they have of the account they're pursuing and really blow out the numbers with a different mindset? Is that possible to do with teams just thinking differently?
Yeah, 100%. It starts with your mindset first, right? Again, my background, I'm coming this from the context of being a Marine intelligence officer. So our job, we're always responsible for supporting strategic planning and providing information about weather, enemy, and terrain, right? So in this context, I don't necessarily want to call the customer the enemy, but they have a vote in what they're going to buy and where they're going to put their dollars against. And they have their own growth plans, internal growth plans of how they're going to grow. And if you don't understand anything more about your customer than your single point of contact for the champion and the economic buyer who signed the last order form from you, and you don't understand the context of how that product or service is supporting one of their initiatives that's driving business outcomes for them, then you're putting yourself at a distinct disadvantage. You got to have to understand, like, what is the company doing? And just the who, what, where, when about your account. What do you really know about them? And when you start understanding that, then you can start unlocking the bigger picture. Like, what deals are we driving? What, based on what are their business outcomes? What strategic initiatives are they? And at what level? Are you talking to a lower level person and their strategic, everything ladders up, right? Those customers do the same math we do. We want to grow by X amount and it gets spread down to them. This guy is trying to find his 500K business outcome, right? But if you can support that, then how can you ladder up to his boss who has a 10X number and above that has a 100X number of just that one guy? So that myopic focus on selling your current contacts the next latest and greatest product offering, like, that's what's limiting yourself. You got to understand your customer, how they make money, what is the industry impact and the marketing impact to them. Is the economy, the recession, or imposing pending tariffs impeding them? What's their strategic growth plans for next year? And how does that ladder, roll down to them? And how can you best support them? And then when you start delivering value there, now their boss and their peers see, and now you're laddering in, hey, that initiative we're supporting is a company level initiative that's shared at these other three groups.
Right.
So
exactly.
you got to have a logical path of what does the matrix organization look like on their end, and where are you supporting them, and then how can you support cross-functionally? That's how you need to think about it, not white space potential based on your product categories, but their business
Exactly.
divisions.
Yeah. It's almost like it's a set of artificial constraints based upon an old, outdated format that is very internally oriented, very focused on product. Even the concept of white space is all about you and not about them. And the problem is it's very limiting in terms of growth. So instead of achieving explosive growth or massive growth, and there's always these great teams that are able to break that paradigm and be an example to everybody else. But there's always a question, which is, how did they do it? What are they doing that's different? And it's that, how do I work backwards from customer? And you brought up analytics and data as sort of your background, but it's that insight, understand the customer's needs first, and then planning against that. My issue is that, or observation rather, is that nobody gives the account teams the intelligence or the tools or the insights or, the provisioning of that incredibly important business intel in the first place.
Yes.
So they're just sort of expected to know this stuff on their own, but nowhere in the background, when you hire an account executive, does it say expert in analytic research, finding how to penetrate large scale growth opportunities across expansive organizations the size of a small country.
Yes.
It's just go out and sell something and bring it back, but there's so much more to it, isn't there?
Yeah, 100%. It's daunting, and the larger the company, the more research you have to have, and it depends on the size and scope and the resources available to your sales team. I was at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise where we had business intelligence teams and market intelligence teams, and we had all these resources that could almost overwhelm the AE, right? With like, here's all this data. How do you make sense of it? Right. Someone's got to get ready to parse that data and make it relevant. And then you have the opposite end extreme where you're at a smaller startup without those resources and they're being asked to find it. But just how many times have you been around in a situation where you're trying to figure out exactly what that current account even is buying from us? What are they currently using, right? What are they currently using? You talk to finance or billing, and you try to talk to customer support. You try to talk to the implementation team and the AE, and somewhere in there is the truth, right? And that's part of the challenge too. And is who is responsible for the account plan? Who is involved in the account planning? I've seen over the last couple of years and like we talk about the stakeholders on the buyer side multiplying, same on the sales side, right?
Yeah,
we almost like you're going to match them peer for peer. We're trying to highly segment out the sales process and highly specialize the roles. So you have an account executive who might own the account, solution engineer that might be brought in to demo right from the beginning. Then you, depending on somewhere later in the sales stage, you have an implementation team that gets involved to talk about that. Then there's some kind of handoff to a customer success rep, and you have a customer support rep who provides the technical support, and the sales manager probably gets involved at some point. Like you have just as many stakeholders where it's like between that, who knows exactly what the customer wants? It gets so fragmented that it gets really, really difficult to understand that.
So you have the vendor side is siloed, the customer is siloed, and then you have an account plan that is in PowerPoint and static that not everybody's looking at all at the same time.
Exactly, because like I said, it's one of those historical artifacts at this point that gets updated once a year, and it probably some kind of approval process somewhere by the end of Q1, and like, now let's go get it, and then never to be revisited, never to be tracked the results, no accountability, do we achieve it or not? And that's where, again, as a Marine intelligence officer, we have this concept that's called the analytical line, where you do your initial research and you make an assessment of the situation on the battlefield. And then now that's a living thing, right? As you get more data in, every day you're taking that data and you're comparing it to your analytical line, and you're paying specific attention to data that refutes the analytical line to overcome confirmation bias. So you're saying, does this support yes or no my assessment? And if yes, okay. If no, why? All right, let me look into that and see, is that true or not? That's the mentality you need to have around an account growth plan or a value plan. Is it can't be this thing you do one time and it was last updated in January, and now we don't ever take in new information and keep it running and going. Like, that's why the account planning cycle feels so difficult, is because you're trying to process a year's worth of data and project into the future what we think is going to happen
once a year,
instead of like revisiting it. And, quite honestly, when do you get the customers' input into it? When do they have a say into, what are their growth plans beyond just their fiscal calendar? Like, it's just broken when you're not doing it from what's the customer trying to do.
Right. They're the ones who spend the money. They're the ones who have the budgets. They're the ones who, pay for everything. So what you're describing, you really need an online sort of daily dashboard view that everybody can see, that's fed with data that the team can react and adapt to. I read an interesting statistic from Gartner that, 83% of sales teams struggle to adapt to changing customer needs and expectations. And if you think about the customer having so many different stakeholders across silos of business, they all have individual needs. Those aggregate up to an overall, project goal or objective or funded initiative. But in order to stay relevant, you have to know exactly what those people are thinking and planning all the time. And you really need an account plan that's online, that's modernized, that's up to date, that's kept up to the moment, that people can look at all at the same time, don't you?
Yeah, of course. And I think, we say, CRM, it's in the CRM, right? Your Salesforce, your HubSpot. But we know now is, as you have these growing disparate roles within your account teams, they're in separate systems too, right? They're not in your CRM.
Right.
Yeah, the CSM might be something else. So they're having a client conversation, or the primary champion leaves, or there's a technical difficulty and the trouble tickets in Jira, and they're using some other CSM system to monitor voice of the company, customer, and CSAT. And where in your organization is all of that disparate siloed data consolidated into one true customer health dashboard that everyone can see, right? That's the challenge, right? You have an account executive that's probably not paid on renewal, so all they're doing is trying to open up a new expansion opportunity when the CSM tells them that they're ready to buy the next great thing. You have a technical support person that's battling specific trouble tickets at one site. You have a CSM that has relationships over here, and you don't have all the data points to even really see what the true customer health is. And you might have an executive sponsor getting invited to their customer advisory boards, or who knows what,
Right.
and you don't have all the data to even figure out what the customer's trying to do. Like, it's a real challenge.
Just to frame it a little differently, one way of looking at things that's different than white space is what I call blue space, but it's the idea of problems by buying center versus products by business unit. It's almost like the reverse of white space, where you're looking at what is the customer looking at, right?
Yeah.
These are all the initiatives I'm trying to solve. They fall into different categories. They span many different buying centers, which can have cross-functional teams making buying decisions at very different levels of seniority, spanning departments, spanning regions of the globe, countries. But the problem itself originates somewhere, and that buying center that is in charge of addressing it or solving it is looking for help.
Yes.
They're looking for, suppliers, vendors, partners to come in and assist in getting the job done. And they get funded, to solve those problems at different altitude levels. And that's really what you're talking about, is working backwards from those buying events, those buying centers, and trying to mine those by attaching product, services, capabilities in a relevant dialogue. that customer can relate to.
Right.
That's really what an account plan ultimately is getting at, right? Is how do I take that picture and align myself to it and then drive growth against that?
Yeah, you keep reminding me of the challenges when you have a global enterprise account and you have multiple sales teams across multiple regions selling to different buying centers, that almost every single one of them needs to have their mini account plans. You can't myopically consolidate it to one big thing, because now all those nuances are getting lost, and right? Or geographic regions have an impact on it. Marketing conditions, there's a lot of factors that influence their abilities and the business problems they're trying to solve, that there's not just one Samsung problem that you're working on.
Exactly.
You could be working on a million of them. And there could be you could have multiple sales teams across your global enterprise interacting with them. So sometimes trying to consolidate it into a single enterprise customer health dashboard is probably not realistic.
You know what? Well, all I can say for sure is that really good account teams that end up sort of evolving over time, customers buy from the team, right?
Yes,
they're buying
from the people. Yeah.
The belief that the team can execute solving some problem or doing something for them that they've come to rely on and trust. And so they go back to that team over and over and over again. And in that case, the team is just as important in the process of winning, so to speak, growth opportunities as any individual person is, because it's the collective work of that team that delights the client, gives them the outcomes that you mentioned before that they desire, that they can rely on and trust. And I know when account teams do that well, clients just come back and buy, more and more and more from the team.
In my opinion, it's been very complicated for an organization to go back and say, we delivered the ROI, the time to value, right? Do you agree, Mr. Customer? Yes, thank you. You've delivered the value. So now we talk about that time to grow. All right, what's the next challenge? What can we help you out with? But without that kind of framework of what is the value that they're buying us for? Are we implementing the right things to collect the right data points so we can prove that we've delivered that value? And then did we claim the win? Do they agree that they've accomplished the business outcomes that we said we deliver? If so, then this is a highly productive, valuable partnership. Let's continue to grow together. Right. But what's challenging is what I always look for is the handoffs. There's so many handoffs in that process, from the SDR or the BDR who starts the conversation, to the AE, to the solution engineer, to the implementation team, to the customer success. There's so many different ways for that to get lost in translation that it's really hard to execute and prove that you've delivered that value. It's the challenges I've seen. Yeah.
That's the piece I want to kind of end on here. I think you're right. If you think about how an account team operates, it's all an email. Back and forth with each other, and then meetings to talk about doing something, but there is no central, as we talked about, online plan where you can observe, the plan in action. And this brings me to kind of this whole concept of, we use the word account planning, but we don't use the word account growth execution. Or account execution, right? You can't execute without the plan, but you can't execute a plan that's on a shelf. And so if you don't have a plan that's living and breathing, there's no way to execute on that plan or monitor the execution. You can't execute what you can't measure. So it really comes down to, recasting what account planning should become, which I think in part is much more dynamic, more online. The whole account team can see everything going on. Data's coming in from the customer, not just coming in from the sales CRM system and the quota assignments on these accounts. And if people can break that paradigm and just, sort of shatter the old way of doing things, they can really unlock enormous growth potential. And I've seen it because the amount of spend that these companies have, particularly the larger ones, with, I think the average Global 2000 company owns 157 other companies.
Wow.
They operate in enormous footprints of of economic spend in many different categories. And once you solve a problem in one place, you can solve it in other places. But oftentimes the team doesn't even know what those other places are,
Right.
that they exist, or to even go there. So I think that there's just a fundamental, recasting of what modernized account planning could be or should be. So I'd love to just capture your, if there was one thing from this great conversation we've had about account planning, as a takeaway, going into 2025, and there's obviously things you can do as a team now, and there's things you can do in the future. What would you suggest account teams think about in terms of trying to sort of break this paradigm and think broader and bigger and more strategically, and again, working back from the customer's needs as a primary construct of that?
Yeah. I think my best piece of advice where I think they should focus on is, what is your current assessment of the customer's growth strategy? What is your analytical line? What are they going to try to do in Y25, right? What is their plan for growth? Then how are you going to best support them to get there? If you come from that perspective, like, what is their goals and their desired business outcomes? What part of that can we help deliver? I think that will be the key to your success, is framing everything you're going to do and all your actions around rallying to help them deliver those business outcomes, then hitting your white space targets for that account.
I think that's great advice. Even if you're hamstrung with the ability to size up and understand, an enterprise account at scale, you can still find key areas of growth opportunity, work backwards, break those down, and try to tie that back into your product and service roadmaps and plans for the account, and try to match them up or align them. I think alignment's been, or lack thereof, has been a big theme of what we've talked about here. Well, Ted, it's been great to have you as a guest. People want to reach out to you. What's a great way for them to communicate?
Find me on LinkedIn. Connect with me. Love to have conversations like this.
Excellent. Well, I love the analytical line. I think that's an excellent concept. I'd love to have you back to talk about execution, growth execution, not just planning and where it should evolve, but once you have that, how do you execute at scale? Someone with your background would be great at giving, guides and advice as how teams, as you said, align to the mission and what can be achieved in terms of, really large at scale growth.
Yeah. I appreciate the conversation. I really enjoyed it. Happy to come back anytime. Thanks, Dave.
Bye-bye.